Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Supply Chain Solutions Weekly Ship Show series. Today is October 27th, 2022, and this is episode number 42 in our Ship Show series for 2022 that keeps you informed of the changing market conditions, emerging trends, and best practices in a volatile time of geopolitical intrigue, supply chain disruption, and inflation. As always, it's my pleasure to welcome my Ship Show co-host, Jason Brand, our Director of Business Development, who joins me each week on our broadcast. And finally, my name's Anthony D'Ambrosio. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Supply Chain Solutions, the company that always delivers value quickly, affordably, and flawlessly. And lastly, we'd like to thank our amazing Director of Marketing, Vanessa Fry, for producing today's show. Well, folks, it's that time again. We are going to do sort of a mini freight market roundup and go over some important topics this week. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason Brand.
Anthony, thank you so much. Yeah, so how we're going to do this week is we're going to run through some industry updates that Anthony and I are keeping our eyes on. So we'll kind of pan around the globe. We'll talk about a lot of the U.S. regions, and we'll just try to kind of keep you in the loop on what areas have what happening, what we're thinking about, and we'd love to, field some of your questions and give you some good answers about best practices we've been dealing with. So first and foremost, let's start with our Trans-Pacific region. Now, kind of break the fourth wall, I guess. Anthony and I can be a little negative at times, and it's because we've really seen some things go terribly wrong over the past couple of years. And trust me, sometimes we both wish our predictions were not accurate. But unfortunately, this is the case where they were accurate. So with the ILWU talks, we predicted that things weren't going as well as stakeholders were claiming they were going. And now we're sitting months after the contract was supposed to be signed, and we've just been watching a flashpoint just beginning to occur. I cannot emphasize the need enough that Anthony and me need to, in the coming weeks, do a timeline and a full breakdown of these talks in the past and current in our predictions, because this is becoming a huge issue this year and it will likely continue. So a couple key points to consider around these talks right now. So the recent analyst prediction is that these talks won't be resolved this year. This could easily go into next year. And this is a serious risk for shippers because the risk of slowdowns every week, every day, it continues, just is rising. We've seen a lot of things occur because of this, but I'll get into that in a moment. Now, this being said, I made an unpopular opinion last week, and I said, hey, unpopular opinion, we've got decent throughput in the West Coast ports. Send your volume through there. Unpopular opinion. I'm going to rescind that because I do think there is a slim window where your cargo could escape a lot of the drama that's going around during this, at this US point of entry, but that window is shrinking, and it's shrinking very quickly. So if your cargo has not left the port yet, consider changing your destination. Now, update from the situation, the ILU negotiations with the PMA, and to get you up to speed, if you haven't been, working with these acronyms. So the ILWU stands for the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and the PMA stands for the Pacific Maritime Association. So those talks, where we're currently at, is they've kind of broken down into a turf war at this point. Now, you assume this would be between the negotiation points, the ILWU and the PMA, but it's actually a little different than that. It's two unions fighting for who has control over what work. So the ILWU right now is fighting with a parallel union, and it's the organization called the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, also known as IAM. And they're just basically fighting over who has rights over what areas and what's going to be included in the contract. It's getting kind of spicy at the moment, and but this is also just the beginning, really, of the heated parts of this, which is happening so late. So keep your eyes on this. Anthony and I will dive into it a lot more later. In another bit of news, though, kind of related to what we were just talking about, but directly related to what's going on, the key indicators of port congestion, which are generally considered vessel backlogs, your container dwell times, and your chassis street dwell time, all of those in Southern California have improved drastically over the past 2 months. Now, obviously, this is due to the ILWU talks and the reorganization of where these containers or shippers' containers are going. But if you kind of look at some of the data points, so 7 container ships were backed up at the Los Angeles Long Beach terminal on Tuesday. That was including 1 at anchor and 1 loitering around 25 miles away from the ports. Now, this is down from 109 back in January. Looking at container dwelling, on the docks, containers that were dwelling 9 days or longer at the ports, which is a huge contributor to congestion. It's down 70% from the peak in fall of 2021. The average dwell time right now for containers for being moved by truck is at around 4.2 days, and that was the data from September. Anthony, dive on in.
Oh, no, just real quick about the dwelling. So you're spot on, Jay, as usual. 4.2 days in LA Long Beach, but I just saw something this morning that in the port of Oakland, it's 18 days waiting for a vessel to berth, and the rail backlogs, which I know Jason is going to get to with the whole rail situation, is really bad. In Oakland, rail shipments are backed up 11 days, and coming out of the ports of LA and Long Beach, we're looking at 16 days on the rail that are backlogged. The Oakland port has a little bit of congestion right now, but Jay, back to you. I just wanted to add that.
That was fantastic. And that was kind of the caveat, right? So, container dwell time of over 9 days is considered very bad. Looking at the trucking area, 4.2 days looks good, but then you pan over to rail, and rail is really pitiful at the moment. Yeah, just as you said, over 16 days right now for rail. And this is at the LA Long Beach ports. When it's operating efficiently, it's supposed to be 3 days, just so you have a means of comparison there. So definitely not where it's supposed to be. Let's quick jump over to China. Obviously, a lot of tension going on between China and the US over many things, but obviously Taiwan is front and center. But let's quick talk about tariffs. So if your company has been affected by the 301 tariffs, it's essentially the time to voice your concerns to the Biden administration. So there's a little quick recap. The 301 tariffs were implemented by the Trump administration. They were put back into place back in 2018, and they affected just a broad range of Chinese goods. But they did escalate duties to 25% and over in certain situations, and they were set to expire actually August of this year. So the Biden administration right now is opened a period of time where stakeholders and companies are going to be able to comment to the USTR and kind of say how they've been affected and their opinions on these. This is going to be between November 15th and January 17th of 2023. You can do this through an online portal. We're going to be helping our customers out doing this. If you need some help and you would like to make a comment on how the 301 tariffs have affected you, reach out to us. We will help you through the process. And it's definitely, as many voices as we can get heard, I think the best decision we can possibly make on this. So now, if you have been plunging into the news lately, I'm sure you all have been, you know that these relations between the US and China have been pretty bad. Taiwan's obviously a major flashpoint, and it's a huge issue for China. But for us, it's an economic security issue, and this is obviously due to the semiconductor production. Now, this does get deeply political, and I want to stay away from this as much as possible. But just last week, President Xi did mention in a speech that Hong Kong has been fully integrated into China, and now they're seeking to do the same with Taiwan. This concern of escalated tensions around Taiwan has not only come from that speech of President Xi, it actually came from our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, just this week as well. So you should expect the area to get a little bit more unstable in the next coming months. Anthony, do you have anything to comment on that? I know you didn't raise your hand, but still.
No, it's quite all right, Jay. I just, I've been looking at some alternative news about this whole situation with Taiwan and of course, their semiconductor manufacturing. And I think really that, you know, if China goes in and takes Taiwan, it's going to really, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to have a really big issue here because, you know, there's some pushback right now because they just opened up a new semiconductor plant out in Arizona. You know, there was some political saber rattling from China about that happening. And, you know, 95% of the world's semiconductors are coming from Taiwan right now. And, you know, it's interesting because their global shares have recently jumped almost 6%. And, you know, so the chip industry is very volatile right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in that. And it's just something we're really watching very closely. You know, it's interesting because overnight, there's a lot of saber rattling going on by everybody. And, you know, the United States just conducted a hypersonic missile test. And it was all over the news this morning, of course, when we woke up. And this all goes back to, you know, ASML, which is one of the world's most important semiconductor companies. And like how I just mentioned, their shares jumping 6%. And so, I mean, it's a really touchy situation right now. Back to you, Jay.
That's, I mean, it really is. We're going to be obviously talking about this
it's
weekly.
a huge tech war right now. And
Yep.
so, you know, China has said that, you know, if the US thinks they're going to start making semiconductor chips again, it's not going to happen. You know, they're already talking about how US chip equipment makers can calculate revenue losses in the billions, you know, after Washington tries to curb China exports and semiconductors. And, you know, there's a lot of things going back on right now. And the United States is actually trying to put regulations in place with the US trade representative to provide some leverage. So I think it's something we're going to really have to watch closely.
I totally agree. A lot of moving pieces as well, really, honestly. And, you know, there was an article I read about, you know, this is the best time. It's been the best time to move away from China from your sourcing, but we're just not moving fast enough. And there's a lot of, you know, government initiatives that have been happening, such as some of the semiconductor stuff, also obviously the, you know, the battery manufacturing stuff. But the question is, will it allow companies to move as fast as they need to be able to kind of like stabilize? So we're obviously going to be watching that. Let's talk about some decent news though for a second. We are going to pan away from our kind of trans-Pacific region, and we're going to come down to the Gulf and the East Coast ports and kind of talk a little bit about that and also Europe. But let's start with Port of Charleston. So Port of Charleston, they're doing a harbor deepening, and it's a project that's taken roughly 11 years to complete. It's going to enable them to handle 20,000 TEU ships, and they're right near the completion at this point. The project also widened the entrance of the channel from 47 feet to 54 feet. And right now, once this is all completed, it actually makes Charleston the deepest harbor on the East Coast. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, as you know, Jay, has been involved in that project. And, you know, Norfolk was the deepest deep water port in the East Coast, particularly because, you know, our major naval base is located in Norfolk. And now it's surprisingly Charleston has rivaled that, as you mentioned. So it's interesting.
It is awesome. I mean, they've got enough volume now that they've got, you know, at least the money coming in where they can afford these projects, right? Which is kind of cool. More good news. CGA, they just announced they're going to introduce a new service. It's called New Brazix, or the Brazilian Express. It's a service that's going to be starting on November 11th for its first sailing. It's going to be San Francisco from New Orleans, and it's going to be a weekly service that's going to use ships that are 6,500 TEU, and they're going to make calls on, like I mentioned, New Orleans, Houston, along with stops at Veracruz, Kingston, Cartagena, and Slaughter that multiple times in a row, and 5 Brazilian ports. So I should have left that bit for you, Anthony. Now, let's see here. Next, let's kind of pan over to Europe. It's unfortunately not as much good news, but dock workers at Liverpool, they walked out on Monday in another 2-week strike over pay as relations between the union and the port operating company have continued to deteriorate. So this is the third strike by these members. The union is called Unite the Union, and this is the third strike since August. It's causing severe disruptions, as you can imagine, and really affecting the container flows to the port. So the lengthy delays have actually caused Maersk to temporarily freeze all port charges on containers arriving after August 30th. Anthony, you want to mention that? I know there's been a lot of stuff happening over in Europe when it comes to strikes lately.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I just wanted to say that, when we think about Europe and that North America, Trans-America westbound traffic, I mean, capacity is definitely increasing. As from this week's capacity to the East Coast, for example, it has increased a lot, with a lot of new, bigger vessels entering the market, coming out of Europe into the U.S. East Coast. Now, that full deployment of all of these newer, larger container ships is expected to reach its peak by mid-November. And although that the rate indexes are showing that rates are dropping, it's not as rapidly as some of the other trade lanes, for example, say, westbound from, from China to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And most fourth quarter freight, most rates, like for FAK, freight all kinds, are really being extended from the third quarter. Okay. So the space is still very tight on the U.S. East Coast to all the major ports, whether it's New York, whether it's Baltimore, whether it's, Norfolk, Savannah, Port Everglades, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The space is still very tight, but they are open, for direct routings to the West Coast if need be, especially out of Turkey right now. A lot of traffic coming out of Turkey right now has been rerouted, believe it or not. And the capacity and equipment is just, equipment availability remains the biggest challenge for all the EU origins right now, particularly in the Mediterranean region. There's a lot of low empty stacks at the inland depots. And so, the prioritization for pickups from the port of loading is a lot more focused. So we would recommend, as we always do, to make sure that you book at least 4 or more weeks out prior to the cargo ready date. And, it's probably better to ask Supply Chain Solutions to give you a premium service, just because there's a higher probability that your shipment's not going to get rolled. And the congestion in Europe is still very bad right now. Plus, we're going into the winter months right now. And and I don't mean to stay on this point so long, but as we go into these winter months, we are going into a real bad situation in the EU, particularly in Germany and in England and Italy, because of the lack of natural gas and diesel fuel and oil right now. I think we're going to see some severe problems in the EU, just to even get their manufacturing done, not let alone get the vessels out of there, just because of the energy consumption issues. So it's something we really have to keep a close eye on.
Anthony, like, so many good points. I'm actually going to touch on the oil and natural gas component here later, because it's like it's the age-old supply chain dilemma. Just because you make it doesn't mean you can get it to the person who needs it, right? Effectively, and cost effectively, especially. Anyways, going to dive into Port of Rotterdam. Actually, we got some news going on there. So it's Port of Rotterdam. It's Europe's largest container hub. And on Friday, they basically announced that they handled 10.9 million TEU in the first 9 months of 2022. Now, that's actually a 4.4% decline over their year-over-year totals, and this is a direct result of the loss of Russian imports. So container traffic between Rotterdam and Russia over the past few years generally represented around 8% of their volume. And that's because it's come to a standstill. There actually is some capacity available out and through of Rotterdam because of this. So 4.4% decline year over year. Now, taking a look at air traffic and air freight. So IBA, they're a company that's focused on market intelligence. Specifically, they look at the aviation industry. Well, this week they published their monthly aviation industry barometer for September 22, and it just comes with a whole bunch of insights. It's focused on both freight traffic and also passenger traffic, but we've discussed this. They're both related, so it's good to kind of know what's happening in the air market as a total. But there's a few great bullet points. So overall, there were approximately 2.42 million commercial passenger flights in September 2022, and that's compared to 2.64 million in August of 2022. Now, obviously a decline into September, but if you're looking year over year, last September was 2.07 million compared to 2.42 million. So we are seeing a pretty substantial increase in general year over year. The IBA found that Latin America is actually leading the global recovery in air travel. So they actually surpassed their pre-pandemic capacity levels in May. As of September, now they're 2% over their capacity levels in 2019, which is fantastic. If you're looking at the Asia Pacific realm, their flight capacity took a substantial hit during September. This is totally due to the recent COVID outbreaks, but when you compare to 2019 levels, their capacity is down by 35%, which is unbelievable. During September of this year, we had 113 new commercial aircraft deliveries. That's a month over month increase of 52%. And when you compare it to August 2022, it's a year over year gain of, or excuse me, Anyway, when you compare a year over year gain, it's a 33% increase from September of 2021. Freighter deliveries, they're pretty much in the realm of Boeing at this point. They had 4 delivered in September. 2 were F7, 777Fs, and then 2 were 767s. They're going to, different operators, but Alaska Air did just order a bunch of 737s. They'll be entering the market, but they won't be entering the market until early next year, and it may be delayed due to supply chain constraints as well. Now I want to dive into oil and gas, but Anthony, do you want to mention anything on air before I do?
No. Please go, Jay. Very important.
Yeah, so oil and gas, obviously a lot of stuff going on right now, but little known fact here. So this might make you slightly upset when you're paying so much at the pump right now, but currently natural gas prices in West Texas, they dipped below zero for the first time since 2020. So it's just, they're producing like crazy. And as a result, they've overwhelmed the pipeline networks. It's essentially trapping supplies in the region. So this means that producers are essentially paying people to take gas off of their hands. And to make everything worse around this, it's pipeline maintenance season, kind of pre-winter, make sure everything's going to be all right. So that's lowering capacity as well. We also haven't had the worst weather. And because it's milder than usual, gas consumption's a little bit lower. So this is kind of a weird situation, but we do have a lot of supply. The problem is getting that supply out to some of the places that are going to require it. That's what I got for oil and gas. Anthony, you want to dive in?
Oh, no, you're good. We can go right on to the next talking point.
Honestly, that's what I've got for today. So
awesome. I have a couple of questions here. We have 3 questions on sourcing, ocean rate, and Germany to US lane. So let's get started. First one is, supply chain has been so chaotic and unpredictable. I know that. I do need a forecast for ocean rates going into 2023 though. So I guess just what is happening? What's your forecast? What's your guess, guys, for 2023 ocean rates?
Did they mention a lane in particular?
They did not, but it was while you were talking about China to US that they sent the question. So I'm going to assume that. If not, send us a message on the chat. Otherwise, we're assuming that right now.
Well, I'll give you my perspective first if Jason doesn't mind. So, listen, folks, as long as inflation continues to run rampant, we are going to see a lot of volatility in the market. And what's happening right now with the ocean carriers in particular is they're all cutting capacity. And what a lot of the importing community, because everybody gets so involved in their day-to-day, logistics is really only a small part of your jobs for all of our listeners, right? It's an important part, but it's a small job. You're worried about production and manufacturing and selling your product and all that good stuff. But, carriers are cutting capacity. There's a lot of new vessels that are going to be coming into the rotation next year that have been ordered, okay, that are like 2.5 years in the process of being built. We're going to have at least 9% new capacity delivered into the global container volume next year, which is going to make rates go down even further. And Jason and I predicted this in the beginning of the year in January when we did our 2022 container outlook for the year. And we predicted if inflation was going to run rampant, market would correct at least 30 to 40%. And we could see right now that on the West Coast, it has corrected a little bit more, almost close to 45%. We're seeing pricing now for containers going into the West Coast out of China, $2,800. Okay. I mean, in a year ago, we were talking $15,000, $16,000, $17,000. So, and plus this is without any gray swan events as we move into 2023. We have another situation with Ukraine. There's a lot of things that you don't know whether to believe or not that are out there in the media today. Things going on in Ukraine, things going on in China with Taiwan. So I think that the market hasn't bottomed out yet. I still think we have a little bit more to go, but I think it's going to be a wild ride as we head into 2023 in terms of pricing. I wish we could say definitively, hey, this is it. It's not going to fall anymore, or it's going to go up on a couple of months. I will tell you that the fuel surcharges are going to continue to increase as we continue to have problems with oil, especially in the United States, that there's only 25 days of diesel fuel. Now, what, 22 days left, Jason? Now, that was 3 days ago, right? They predicted there was only 25 days more diesel fuel left in the United States. So, Jay, go ahead. I'm sorry for being long-winded.
No, that honestly, I think you covered it all. I think I think you made like a really good point too. Like some of these charges that are associated with the rates are likely going to rise, but the rate itself is likely going to drop. So you'll kind of see the floor rise, if that makes sense, but then the actual rate itself drop. And yeah, the capacity wise has been wild because nobody expected this big of a dropout. I mean, Anthony and I expected a drop, but this is substantial. I mean, this is massive what we've seen. Now, that being said, carriers are reacting by pulling capacity out, which they do. So as soon as people start shipping more, as soon as we start to kind of, and this is obviously we're looking into the future, as soon as we start to exit the recessionary mode, that lack of capacity will cause rates to go up again faster than it should, because carriers are going to want that to happen as they remove capacity for a financial reason, right? Then they're not going to reintroduce it until they see these rates rise again. You mentioned a lot of really great points as well, Anthony. The Taiwan situation is, to me, the most concerning after those recent comments from President Xi. If something happens at the Taiwan situation, that's a huge trade lane, and that is a huge disruption. So, and also, as I mentioned, this was going to be a year of more mode shifting and people starting to, change where they're sourcing from, utilize different trade lanes that might be a little bit more stable than some of these that we saw just go bonkers, but it's not happening fast enough. And because these rates have dropped so much, a lot of companies are, obviously still looking and saying, hey, the rate right now between China and the US, $2,000, that's not bad at all. If the ILWU wraps up, pay increases, right? Some of those charges increase. So your essentially overhead for those prices goes up, but your rate kind of stays the same. It's not a bad rate compared to what we've been paying the past 2 years. I would say in the next 6 months, you're going to see rates rise, but I would only say that if we're able to get out of this recessionary period and then demand's able to increase. And if demand does increase, then we're just dealing with all these carriers removing all their capacity and just not having enough slots on the vessel. So then supply and demand takes back over again. I know we're going back and forth on this one, but Anthony, how do you feel about that? Do you sort of agree with that?
No, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, that was perfect. So let's stay on the rates. And I have a question from Christy. Can you update us on Germany to US lane? Do you guys have any updates on that lane?
I could give you a little bit about Germany, real quick, if Jay doesn't mind. I mean, so, Germany's in a really tough situation right now. There are a lot of major congestion issues in Northern Europe. Now, there is a little bit of easing, but the situation remains very fluid because there's still a lot of labor disputes that have not been fully resolved. So all the carriers are continuing, like all carriers have stopped booking shipments from Ukraine, from Russia, from places like Belarus up in that Northern Europe area. But specifically coming out of Germany, the congestion is bad. I mean, rates coming out of Germany right now are anywhere between 67.50 to 73.50 for a 40-foot equipment unit. But I think, like Jason said earlier, although some of the base rates are dropping, as we continue this year, I believe that, continue in 2022 and move into 2023. 2023 is going to become the year of the accessorial charge. So you're going to see a lot of carriers start adding all these little ticky-tack charges, accessorial fees to try to boost up some of their profitabilities. But there's really a lot of current shipping issues impacting the freight cost and the shipping delays, not only just the seasonality, but there's a drop in available exports. There's the whole inflation factor. There's the whole factor of consumer demand and the CPI index, causing decreases in the ocean pricing. So things are going to remain very volatile but elevated compared to the pre-pandemic prices coming out of Europe. So that's my little bit of spin on Germany. I think things are going to get really sticky in Germany as we get into November and December. So I would recommend to everyone, if you need some stuff coming out of Germany, particularly, you got to book right now and get some of that inventory in, because as we get into December and January and February, I think we have a little bit of a perfect storm developing over in Europe, but specifically Germany. Bremerhaven and Hamburg are extremely backlogged right now.
Yeah.
And we know specifically, sorry, Jay, because we have a lot of freight coming out of Germany right now. And, this is something we live it every day. So go ahead, Jay, back to you.
Yeah, no. I mean, you saying that next year is going to be the year of the accessorial charge is, I think, so spot on. And you want to add to that, we've got IMO 2023, and that's likely going to also increase everybody's base rate as we start to do some of these environmental initiatives and they get installed. Also going to be removing capacity as well. So it's kind of another twofold happening next year. And, when we generally kind of take a look at our rate trends in our normal freight market roundup, what we've noticed over the course of the past 2 years is, and particularly actually this year, obviously with the Ukraine situation, but it's that, transatlantic lane that's been the biggest roller coaster of all of them. And it's been the most stubborn. All the rest of the lanes have dropped substantially more than the transatlantic lane. Right now, the prices that Anthony mentioned, that was early year all-time highs. 7,500 was an all-time high we saw in this lane, and we're still sitting there while every other lane is now approaching almost pre-pandemic levels. So we've got that. And then when you think about business risk, the other week we went over, there is a series of inflation issues happening across Europe. It's causing just strikes in general. Your risk of having a situation or disruption at the port is very high right now, particularly in Europe, which is unfortunate. But as these start to get ironed over, I think we can obviously start to eliminate some of that risk. We just need to, you don't have to look at UK, because UK is obviously operating differently than the rest of Europe. They just do in general. They made that clear, obviously, with the whole Brexit situation. But, as you watch some of these other strikes and how they're handled, when we start to see them resolved, that's a positive sign. And you can kind of take that business risk off. But from a rate standpoint, you should expect those rates to probably stay more elevated than the rest. And that's twofold. Europe and also East Coast ports are handling all the cargo that would normally come into West Coast, or most.
Right. And I know Vanessa's got one question left. So just remember, now it's 2 years into the supply chain crisis. Rates are beginning to stabilize, although on some lanes, prices are still almost 400% higher than they were pre-pandemic. Back to you, Vanessa. So sorry.
No, that was awesome.
Perfect answers. The last question should be a quick one. How long does it take to tackle a resourcing consulting evaluation with you guys? I guess they want to know more of a timeline.
Well, I think the best thing to do, and we actually we bring a lot of freight in for a chocolate company located up in northern New Jersey, just to give you like a little mini case study perspective. And not only do we bring their chocolate in from Belgium, and we barge it down the Rhine River, and then we load it in Antwerp into a container. A lot of their packaging material was coming out of China over the last year and a half, and so they needed a workaround. So we had some boots on the ground in India and in Mexico. We were able to connect them through our relationships in a local environment. So you have to remember, at Supply Chain Solutions, we just don't connect the freight from point to point. Anybody can do that. We try to connect the people, and I think Jason and Vanessa would agree with that. And our relationships in a global environment are just bigger than moving freight, okay? You know, our partners, many of them have their own trading companies. We have relationships with different manufacturers and different manufacturing sectors. So we were able to help this chocolate company in North New Jersey totally move all of their packaging material production from China to India and have another 25% put in Mexico. And I think we've saved them over $500,000 this year, just on logistics costs. Now, that may not seem like a lot of money, but if you start to track that year over year, you know, it adds up. So I would say reach out to myself and Jason, to Vanessa. We have some amazing minds in supply chain solutions, like one of our top consultants, who is a supply chain solution employee, John Stewart, is amazing. And we can come out and give you a great analysis. And then Jason and I and John could also let you know, which way you should go. Should we near source? Should we resource? You know, what's the best sourcing initiatives for you? So just reach out to us. Let's get the ball going and get an initial conversation. Jay, I know you might have a few tidbits you might want to add on that.
Oh yeah, no, I love resourcing projects because we've been getting better and better at it, literally over the course of the past couple of years. We work really closely with a few partners. There's BCC Sourcing that is generally been focused on India, but now they've got a team in Mexico, and now they've kind of built up a pretty good list of manufacturers that they've got confidence in, they've had good experiences with, they know how to work with them. They'll put someone inside that manufacturer and walk through the sampling process to make sure everything is exactly in line with your expectations. Right. And they stay afterwards. They stay for 6 months afterwards, over, when you're actually shipping and resource, to make sure that, everything is kind of staying in line with your expectations. And they're good at writing contracts to make sure you're protected and you're going to get the product you want, which is fantastic. Another partner we work very closely with is Sourcing Insights. They're really great at doing quick switches. Amazing. They're fantastic. If you are looking at like a raw material resourcing, they're really good at that. They're already working with over $38 billion worth of invoicing across their whole customer base. We're strategically partnered with them. And so as a result, we try to kind of introduce people to them early on so they can do a quick analysis of where you're at as a company. And if you've got a resourcing question, they can kind of focus on that. And then they can decide if there is actually a good benefit or not, relatively fast. So definitely would recommend reaching out to us. Because they're a strategic partner of ours, they don't charge for those analyses. It's kind of thought as, hey, you work with us, we're mutually benefiting. So yeah, but and definitely reach out to
real
us.
Quick.
Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff. One last thing. I know we're running long, Vanessa. So our executive vice president of global trade, Vandana Bal, is getting ready to roll out her Mission India initiative. So she's going to be traveling to India with some of our staff in early January. I think it's mid-January. And some of that, a lot of that travel there is focused on helping clients resource some products, as well as, you know, cultivate existing business. So you should reach out to us, you know, before we get to the holiday season in December, so we can connect you with Vandana. We could try to source some new products for you. India is a great area. We just have to, as Jason said, make sure your specifications and quality are up to your needs. But we're going to have some boots in the ground out there in January. So you guys should definitely hit us up, because I know she's specifically going there to help a couple of clients with some of their resourcing initiatives. So we look forward to hearing from you.
First of all, I got to say thank you all for sticking with us. We are having obviously a blast today. We're shooting for two. Thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time. We've got a busy week over here at Supply Chain, which I'm sure everyone else is having as well. But hey, thanks for your questions. Thanks for your engagement. Make it a great week.
And remember, none of this happens without the amazing Vanessa Fry, who puts up with this and produces this show every week.
Stop it. You guys are the stars. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Make it a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.